Okay, so I think we're live. Hopefully, you can hear and see me okay if you're watching this live, or indeed watching and listening to the recording. I thought I would jump on and talk about a headline that I saw yesterday, I think it was, maybe the day before, about Denmark and their Statsminister, their PM, their Prime Minister. And she has said that she wants to ban social media for the under 16s, so the under 15s. And I just thought, and I'll quote some bits and pieces from her speech about that. And I just thought, good for you. That's a really good idea. And yet, it's fraught with difficulty. How do we unravel this particular Gordian knot? Because there are pros and cons, as we shall see. But I want it to happen. I wish there was a way to magically say, right, okay, you kids, you are protected from a lot of the horrors that you can unfortunately find all too easily online. But is that doable? Anyway, let's look at the headlines. So this is from the Metro, but it's widely reported, BBC as well. Let me just see if we are live at this point in time. Can't tell. I'll presume that we are. So, it'll be a good dress rehearsal, if not. So you'll see here this particular headline: Denmark bans social media for under 15s. Now, what is then behind that? Well, if you have been watching and listening in the UK and probably other countries, if you're tuning into this from there, you'll be aware that this is a debate that's gone on for quite some time. And I think it's fair to say that if any of us decide to look at the, I think you can see one image on that, and you cannot see the live image of me. You're probably able to hear me, so hold on a second. This is also one of the reasons I do lives. I've just updated a lot of things on YouTube, and although I think this is me, this is a user error. Let me just see if I can refresh this by doing that to there. Yep, there you go. And yeah, okay. So that image is, as far as I can see, is live. You don't have to see me, but I know sometimes people don't like just the voice only on certain things. Although you may be saying, yeah, I prefer it. Or just no visual, no voice, just show us the slides. So anyway, let's go here. You will see that announcing the new law at the opening of the Danish Parliament yesterday, Tuesday, Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen said phones and social media were stealing our children's childhood. And I have to say, let me just pull that across a little bit so you can see. There we are, that's better. And I have to say, although it's, some could argue, an emotive phrase, I also think that's exactly what it's doing. It is literally stealing childhoods, because if you're old enough, you don't have to be that old to remember a childhood when people were not tethered to their phones. They might have been tethered to a television set, but most of the time that wasn't portable either, although there were some. And really, there was much more of a schedule around when you would interact with media, although when it was simply TV and radio, it was more listening and watching than actually a two-way thing. Although you could phone in and talk to people on some radio shows, and I guess TV as well. But like that was like one person in so many million. So it was quite a thing. These days, that is not how things are, as we are aware. So, let's go here. Slightly different opinion. Andy Burrows, CEO of the Molly Rose Foundation. Our research shows the scale of preventable harm which teenagers face on social media, but a ban would risk unintended consequences and leave young people on a cliff edge of harm when they reach 16 and start to use social media platforms. And you can see where Andy's coming from there, and you may or may not be aware of the Molly Rose Foundation, but absolutely tragic. A young life gone because of things on social media, and yet we have that foundation saying that a ban would risk unintended consequences. And to repeat what I already said, as I quoted before, but it's so emotive, leave young people on a cliff edge of harm when they reach 16. And I'm guessing what Andy Burrows is saying is there's been no exposure. So I hate to use the word, but it's probably the most fitting here. There would be no element of desensitization. In other words, somebody going from nothing to being plunged into social media and the speed and the content and sometimes the ferocity and the strange adulation and also the hate that can crop up. It could be too much to bear. It's a little bit like someone who has, let's say, lived in a forest all their lives, been in nature, and then you drop them in the city. An example, and it's not quite the same thing, but to hopefully make the point that springs to mind is Tom Cruise in the film, not Tom Cruise, Tom Hanks, easily mixed up. Not Tom Hanks. Tom's version had the castaway running all around the island. So Tom Hanks, when he gets back, spoiler, off the island, he can hardly face the vast amounts of food and the noise and the smell and the textures and a bed. And I think that's an attenuated version of what someone who could be plunged into at, let's say, the age 16 to social media without any idea or real idea of what it was like. So I take the point that Andy Burrows is making. I think it's a very valid point. I wished it wasn't, because I wish we could just say, bang, boom, stop. You're not going to say anything, kids, at all. But if they do get introduced to it, which at some point, when they're legally able to do so, what would they be introduced to? Could it be too much of a culture shock? And if I imagine that they literally, this would be a little bit magical, I appreciate, but if they literally could see nothing at all, hear nothing, no exposure, and then at 16, on the stroke of midnight, they're given free access to social media, it would prove for some to be just overwhelming. And that's putting it mildly. So it's interesting. So I guess where I'm coming from is that on one hand, the concept of Meta Frederickson, this idea of it's ruining, it's destroying childhoods, I totally agree. And I want it stopped. But how do you do it? Because as Andy Burrows says here, if you stopped access entirely and then somehow people were given access, it could prove too much. This cliff edge. And then you think, well, could there be a way to gradually introduce it as people reached certain ages? And that could prove to be like a whole government department and operatives of that department trying to police that. And that does sound unworkable. But anyway, let's move here to the next slide. And this is someone talking about the Danish PM. So she, I think it's a she, yes, describes it as real leadership. So the Prime Minister of Denmark saying, ban this, recognising that our children's well-being must come before the profits of tech giants whose business model depends on stealing their time and attention. And that absolutely is the case, in my opinion. That's what it's about. It's about profit. It's actually about super normal profit and at times greed. And what these companies want to do is, of course, steal time and attention. That's the business model. I've said it before in relation to not simply children, but all of us, adults. If we are seduced into watching things for hours, days at a time, then we become the product, as it were. We're, I should say, the raw material for those companies, those organizations. And I don't know about you, but it kind of sticks in my craw a little bit to consider that children are indeed the raw material for some of these big corporations. I don't like that at all. And I've talked before about attention spans. I've talked before about the models that these companies use, like the endless scroll, and I've also talked about the fact that it can be extremely harmful to an individual's mental health, and that's adults. So then we go here. She said that while it might be difficult to implement, we've reached the point where inaction is indefensible. And I got to say, I agree with that as well. So if you are watching this live, or you're watching on catch up the recording, if it records okay, then I'm not going to end up with a clearly defined way forward, because I think it is one of these problems that's so important that we can't dismiss it, and we can't simply say, oh, okay, yeah, the answer is this. We can just think it up overnight, because it is multifactorial in many ways, and it requires subtle and nuanced and balanced thinking, and also critical thinking. But yet, something's got to be done. So, back to that point. We've reached the point where inaction is indefensible. Then, the news from Denmark shows how around the world governments are waking up and parents are rising up demanding change. Yes, they are. Yes, they should. And people are waking up because it is it's just ghastly what you consider what children can get access to. The stuff that you and I have probably looked at, not deliberately, and that's this. And what we're seeing, most of the population, isn't the really bad stuff. But even then, you look at it and think, oh my goodness, it can be hard to look at as an adult with a bit of experience and seasoning and time. So for children, goodness sake, this could be. I mean, it's not could be. It is harmful. So, what I wanted to do, as promised, if you heard the start of this little live, is to read out what the Danish Statsminister, Mette Frederiksen, said to basically I guess this would be the House of Commons equivalent. Forgive me if I'm wrong with that. Anyway, so her speech was, we have said yes to mobile phones in our children's lives in the best sense of the word. So they can call home and communicate with their friends. Absolutely. So we can't turn our backs on that technology. It is good that a child can be reached, can be contacted, can be traced, in fact, as well, tracked. Oh, they're there. And we, of course, now have video calls. Well, show me where you are. Who else is with you? That's hard. That's hard to let go of that. In fact, I think it would be a backward step, because I think it is so important these days, when everything else is wired and monitored and surveilled, not to be able to have that pretty fast, immediate, real-time contact with a child in situations when and where it was required. But the reality is that we have unleashed a monster. Now, I'll pause there, because I believe that is exactly what it is. It is a monster. It absolutely is a monster. The whole online experience has grown arms and legs at a pace that no one, if they couldn't have foreseen it, then you'd kind of forgive them, because it's just been incredible. Some people might have foreseen it, but, again, there's money, and maybe they don't care. I'm sure also there are people in corporations, in positions of influence, who do care. Don't want to paint too bleak a picture, although it is serious. So, we unleashed a monster. Never before have so many children and young people suffered from anxiety and depression. Many have difficulty reading and concentrating. And one of the issues there is it's not just online. It is partly the pace of life. So many things are on a screen. So many things are there that we can access, and we can change quickly between experiences. And that's important to bear in mind. So the concentration thing, some people say it's not just to do with social media, and I think that's true. But I also believe it has a role to play. And when we have young people suffering from anxiety and depression, that is, at least in part, because of social media, in my opinion. And then the article goes on. They see things on the screen that they shouldn't. Absolutely. 100%. And a full 60% of 11 to 19-year-old boys don't see a single friend physically in their free time during the course of a week. Do you think that the number would be so high if it weren't for the smartphone? No, I do not, Meta. I do not think that at all. I think this has got a lot to do with it, because people can delve into their own worlds, their own, it could, of course, literally be gaming, where the worlds are created, and one can argue there is a social aspect to that which could benefit. And I'll come on to the benefits, but it is also the case that people can think they're in contact, and to a degree they are, but they're isolated. They're in one location, they're in one room. Really importantly, they're not getting outdoors. They're not getting outside at all. Or as much as they used to. And it's not just Denmark, of course. We see that in so many countries around the world. And that in of itself is a tragedy. So on one hand, there can be stress, there can be trauma to a degree, depending on what they see online, because they are exposed to it, and on the other, they're not getting the healing benefits of being outdoors, in fresh air, in nature, and playing physically and interacting with their friends in real time and in real situations. So I would say that's a powerful speech, and I think it's also made by someone who isn't looking at this politically. I mean, I could be wrong, but she comes across to me as someone who is just saying, look, this is harming children, this is wrong, what do we do about it? Anyway, in other words, I don't think there's an agenda behind it beyond protecting children. So from here, and this is the proposal, the government will therefore propose that we ban social media for children and young people under the age of 15, with the option for parents to give permission from the age of 13, which is interesting. So the state here isn't saying it's up until 15 and that's it. They're saying, okay, parents can be allowed to make discretionary choices from the age 13. I hope that you here in the chamber will help tighten the law so that we take better care of our children here in Denmark. So that's the end of the speech as quoted in the Metro. Dr. Fiona Scott, a lecturer on the digital lives of children at Sheffield University, said she did not think bans were the answer. So just as we heard before about the cliff edge that children may face if they're not allowed in social media until age 16, we get someone else. And this time a lecturer on the digital lives of children. Social media bans obfuscate much larger and more complex issues, and if poorly implemented, could actively cause more harm than good, she told the Metro. One risk is that they could push children's internet use underground towards less regulated parts. Yes, unfortunately, it's difficult not to agree with that. Or they might not even work at all. Evidence from France shows similar bans are easily circumvented, with almost half of users avoiding restrictions through VPNs. And, well, again, I'm asking a question. What do you think? What do you think about that? Is that a valid criticism? And what have we got so far then? In my opinion, my reading of it is that we have a Prime Minister in Denmark who I believe, I could be wrong, could be totally wrong, is not saying this for any reason. There's no political reason behind it. It's not about gaining more control over the population, or it doesn't seem to be. It's not about restricting people's lives just because we can type thing. It's not some power play, I don't think. Again, I could be wrong, but it's not how it comes across to me. It comes across to me as if this is an individual who, I don't know if she's a parent or not. I'm guessing yes. I could be wrong, but I'm guessing yes. And if not, then knows parents, knows children, knows how important it is to have a proper childhood, and is saying, we've unleashed the monster, what can we do? And then we get more than one counter argument. One, we heard about the cliff edge, this idea that if people are not allowed to access social media, children allowed to access social media until age 16, then exposed to it would be, I'll use my word, traumatic. And I think that is the case. Could there be a gradual exposure? Perhaps. Yes, we could, you and I, we could write out the proposal right now on paper and say, yeah, here's how you could do it. Would that be practical in real life? Would it be doable? I don't know. So that's perhaps one way. And then the other main argument from Fiona Scott, I think it was, is well, you push it underground. And the argument there is we could see with the VPNs. Again, this is that France was mentioned, but also recently in the UK. So people, for other reasons, have been trying to get around saying who they are and filling in ID checks and using VPNs. And the suggestion is that this could happen if such a ban was attempted to be put into place in Denmark. In other words, there are ways around things. There always will be ways around things. And so I I come back to where I began at the start of this, that to me, it is wrong. We are destroying lives, some, perhaps an awful lot more than we realise, but one life, is one life that shouldn't have been destroyed because of the stuff that's online, accessible. And I also come back around to thinking, but is there another way to do that then? Could it be, and this isn't my idea, I read it somewhere, perhaps you've seen this as well, that the very handsets themselves are somehow just set up. So it's like the hardware, not just the software, the hardware is set up so that, you can make phone calls and you can contact parents and you can make video calls, you can record video and take photographs, but you cannot with those devices access social media. Is that one way? And then you may be thinking, but hold on, they've got tablets, they've got laptops. I know. And maybe they'd have to be set up that way. And immediately it sounds a little bit cumbersome. But it could be done. And I think that would be more watertight, although not totally, but more watertight than saying, okay, it's some kind of software thing, or you've got to put your age, you've got to put your ID in, because that could drive it underground. It could also, one could argue, drive underground devices that weren't locked in that way. But they're physical, and maybe that would make it harder. And there's also part of me that thinks, well, hold on a second. When you say something is forbidden, it can drive people towards it. Even people who would have said, well, I'm not interested in that. I don't want to look at that stuff. Oh, why are we not allowed to? That, unfortunately, is also a facet of human nature or the nature of some humans. So it is not clear cut, and yet I believe something has got to be done. Now, let me just check here. Okay. So they've sort of rejigged YouTube, as I was saying at the beginning, a little bit. And I don't think there's any questions or comments, but there's a few people watching. And so, hello, welcome. So let me then try and draw this to some semblance of a conclusion. And once more, these are my thoughts. This is my opinion. So number one, something's got to be done. I do believe we cannot allow things to continue as they are right now. Partly because we know that attention spans are being damaged and harmed in adults as well as children, and some people would argue, maybe they're in the pay of some of those big corporations, bots, etc. Who knows? But I couldn't possibly comment. Some people would argue that, well, it's nothing to do with social media. Now, I would say it is to do with social media, but it's not the full story. If we consider that these days our attention is drawn left, right and centre, there are screens in cars, which I find kind of astounding as an aside, these big screens that sit in some of the newer vehicles. That's distracting. But anyway, that's another story for another time. But there are screens there. Obviously, they're on phones, they're on laptops, as I mentioned. They are on tablets, as I mentioned. And we still have TVs. And pretty much everywhere you go, your attention can be drawn. Even like the moving billboard, if you're walking down a street. Obviously, the mobile. Obviously the tablet, the laptop. And because we can flick between content so quickly, we're encouraged, therefore, to surface skim and get the sort of salient points and then look to the next device or the next thing that's coming in. And remember, we also have these alerts that pop up, the little red dot, the ping, whatever it is. And suddenly we're sort of jumping at our own shadows. And what that means is that we often don't spend enough time actually being present and learning things in a deeper fashion. It's like a sort of ChatGPT level of intelligence. In other words, well, ChatGPT, as we know, can tell fibs and can give totally wrong answers because it's skimmed from the surface. And if we do that as well without thinking and contemplating, then we can end up with very shallow ideas about things. And that lends itself, it's almost self-fulfilling because we can then look at all sorts of different screens, all sorts of different content, not staying, not thinking, not reading, perhaps a paper book, not writing, which helps consolidate our learning as well, because we paraphrase things when we write and put it into our own words. It gives us another level of knowledge and understanding, because less and less of us are doing that type of thing. Then more and more of us are not only learning and thinking at a shallow level. You know, do you know it or do you Google know it? Do you know it or did AI tell you what to think about that? Not only that, but our attention spans, because of that global shift, are shrinking. Because it's like, oh, I've got that, but something's pinging over there. I've got to go and look at this other screen and respond to this particular message coming in. You know, FOMO, fear of missing out, or whatever it may be. And that's not good. One of the reasons, by the way, why meditation, particularly these days, whatever form of meditation it is that you've tried or are thinking about doing, most types of meditation are quite a good antidote to that to a degree. But our attention spans are shrinking. Now, here's the other thing that can happen when attention spans shrink or reduce. To shift between tasks causes us to expend energy. So in the executive suite, I think that, if memory serves, it's Brodmann Area 10 is implicated in this. So when you're in the middle of a task, whether it's reading a message or looking at something that's caught your attention online, whatever it may be, when you leave the task that you were on to go and check out whatever that message was, let's say it was a message, then what you've got to do is remember where you were on the original task in time and space, and then go across to the other task. And then when you stop that task, remember where you were in the middle of that particular message reading, let's say, and then maybe you've got another task over there. So this is, some people call it multitasking, but in actual fact, it's more akin to the computer term multiplexing. In other words, we've got all these income streams, not income streams, inbound streams, multiple income streams. No, it's not an advert, sorry. No, don't worry, not an advert. It's not about income. Multiple input streams, and we can access them. And what we've got to do is we've got to move between them. And sometimes we do that quite quickly, particularly when our attention spans are lowered. And because we're utilising, amongst other areas of the brain, let's say Brodmann Area 10, again, I think that's one of the areas, then what happens? We get tired, we get fatigued, and the more fatigued we get, the less we're able to take things in. So it's not that it's making us dumber in that sense. As I've said before, it means that we're skimming things at a surface level, and we are using up energy. We're using up precious thinking, executive suite, frontal cortex energy. And that means ultimately, at the end of the day, we're tired in a way that we probably wouldn't have been in the past. We're less outdoors and doing proper exercise and physically doing things. And in the mix of that mix, we're being exposed to some content which could be stressful and or indeed deleterious to our mental and physical health. And if that's a child, I mean, that's us, that's adults, but if that's happening to a child, can you imagine how that can change and warp development in a way that is not good? And then we wonder, as I was reading out earlier, you know, anxiety and depression getting higher, rising. And also there was a study, I made a video about this a little while back, that showed in the States how mental health, challenges, poorer mental health was seen round about, a steep rise up, round about the time that mobile phones or cell phones in the States or smartphones were introduced. And again, correlation doesn't mean causation, but it looks like a compelling argument to me. However, there's probably more than that in the mix. And also bear in mind that particularly with children, when they're doing stuff online, as I've said already, they're not getting outside, they're not doing things physically or not as much, and they're not interacting. And they're not interacting in the little groups and tribes that you may recall that we used to, where you can find, it helps you socialize, doesn't it? Because there are things that people say and do online that if you were with them face to face, well, it's diffused in real time. It evens out in a more, generally in a more, let's say, civilized fashion. So all of that is in the mix as far as I'm concerned. So if I take that and run with it, what I've just said there, then it seems to me that we have to find ways to limit the exposure to what is on social media, whether that's a blanket ban, if that can be done or not, and certainly the length of time that people are able to be online. And when I say people, I'm talking about children in particular, although it applies to all of us. And also to greatly encourage kids to get outdoors. I know that isn't possible for everyone, but there are not an awful lot of people for whom it is entirely possible, but it is so seductive. Remember, these platforms, these apps, these interactions are designed to be seductive, to suck people's time and energy in, as I was saying earlier, because we're the raw material, all of us, not just children, but I'm talking here particularly about children. And so we've got to find schemes and ways to encourage kids to get outdoors and play outdoors much more, just like they used to, because that's just good all round, mentally and physically, and the social interaction that is in real 3D space, preferably in fresh air, reaps huge rewards for children. If they are seeing things through a sort of hermetically sealed environment with only one tiny window, and that is through which they can glean social media, which can be warped and distorted and nasty, this is not good. And of course, as it has been said before, not by me, I think it was Jonathan Haidt who wrote The Coddling of the American Mind, which is where you can find more stats about that, by the way, including that study, I believe, that I quoted about the mental health challenges that have been going on and the introduction of tech. So I think it was Jonathan who essentially said, imagine putting a window that strangers could walk by and glance in, from the street, and that window was into a room, and living in that room was your child or children or your children. Imagine that. You wouldn't do it. You would say, "What the heck? Get out of here! Pull the blind, brick that up. What are you doing?" So it's not just that they can see out; it's that others can see in. And again, for me, that is awful. It's an awful thought, and yet that's what we've done by handing these devices to young children, that two-way street. So I don't know quite what can be done. I think it is encouraging people to get outdoors. I think it is limiting the time, at least, if not somehow banning it, but also being aware of that cliff edge that was mentioned, where people could, without getting desensitized and in a build-up to getting more access to social media, could find themselves in trouble. And I think ultimately that's probably going to have to be built in. You could argue that Meta Fredrickson kind of built that in by saying from the age of 13, before 16, parental discretion would be in the mix, as it were. And another thing that I would suggest to sort of finish off, or I would highlight to finish off, is when we find ourselves being online, and including children, so often, most of it, if it is too much, is, in my opinion, detrimental. But there was also a study that I think from a couple of years ago that showed, or suggested, I should say, that the optimum length of time for people to be on social media every day, where you got some sort of benefit, but you didn't overstay your welcome. In other words, it became toxic, was 30 minutes, 30 minutes every day. But that is across every social media platform. So if you were on TikTok and Instagram and X, 30 minutes for all of them together. And you think, okay, now, studies are studies. They're not real life. They're indications. They're facsimiles. They're ciphers. And everyone is different. But imagine that. Imagine then if time was limited for these children. That could be another way to do it. And by the way, that study was about adults, as far as I can remember. It wasn't specifically looking at children. So that's for all of us. 30 minutes. Now, if something's educational, if something is newsworthy, if we're learning, if we are enjoying, if it's art, if it's drama, I don't think we're talking about that. I think we're talking about the interactions, the liking, the messaging, all that sort of stuff. And 30 being the optimum, according to that study. Everybody will be different. But then, just to finish off here, don't think there's any questions or comments come up. So just to finish off, and also to highlight how challenging this can be to implement that which I hope is implemented, but I'm not quite sure how the detail of it will be rolled out in Denmark, but I hope it is implemented somehow. The other thing about that study, the 30 minutes, the 30 per day across every social media platform per person as being the optimum. It did concede that, or perhaps it was a study writing about that study, I read that we have to pay attention also to the fact that for some people, 30 minutes might not be enough. In fact, 30 minutes could be detrimental. Not talking about children, this is adults. Because some people's interaction is that's it. For whatever reason, they are stuck, stranded, just they cannot interact in the same way. And that's like a lifeline to them. So once more, yes, I think we have to look at what we can do as a blanket thing across the board, in this case for children, but we also have to be aware, however it is rolled out, however it is implemented, that there should be exceptions to that. And hopefully I don't know whether it would be legislation, presumably legislation, whatever that was, put that in place. And I would like to see it in other countries as well, and I'd like to see more done in the UK. But I'm not sure that simply asking for IDs, as is the case in the UK at the moment for certain particular websites, whether that's going to cut it because of the VPN use and the fact that things can be also unfortunately driven underground. That I'm not talking there specifically about social media, I hope you understand, but just what we could see in the UK recently. Has it changed things? I don't know, but VPN purchases went up, apparently. In terms of the children here, I do hope we can do something, and I really hope that Denmark leads the way, because we have to do something to, and again, a quote from Mette Frederiksen, we have to contain this monster, this window that our children can have to look out on unspeakable things, and unspeakable people can look in on them. Anyway, I don't think I've missed any chat. If you are still there, or you've caught it halfway through, or just at the end, or maybe you've been here since the beginning, thank you very much. I'm partly also trying out how this setup works with YouTube now that they've made some changes. It doesn't seem to be that much different, but hopefully the signal was okay and things didn't freeze, and the audio is all right as well. And hopefully you found that interesting, and if it does record or has recorded, I'll have a look at it, and then maybe we'll do some more lives in the not too distant future, and also maybe I will advertise or let people know we're going to do it so we can get more of a conversation. Let me know if that's something you would like to do. Anyway, for the moment, from me, bye for now.